I'm going to talk to you about another factor affecting population and ultimate population size, and that's peak oil, or the idea that our main energy source at the moment is much more limited than commonly believed. So, but for a bit of a change, at least for me, in talking about this topic, I thought I'd like to go straight into something else, which is an old work published back in 1972, which most people will be familiar with here, called Limits to Growth, which has been very unpopular, but which has recently begun to be reappreciated. And this is a quote which I thought I'd quickly read to you from someone at the CSIRO, Graham Turner, who's made a study of the Limits to Growth initial work and how we're tracking in terms of the predictions that it made for our future. So he says that in 1972, the Club of Rome's infamous report, The Limits to Growth, presented some challenging scenarios for global sustainability based on a systems dynamics computer model to simulate the interactions of 5 global economic subsystems, namely population, food production, industrial production, pollution, and consumption of non-renewable resources. Contrary to popular belief, the Limits to Growth scenarios by the team of analysts from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology did not predict world collapse by the end of the 20th century. That's basically a furphy which has been propagated by primarily economists who wish to oppose the ideas presented in this book. This paper focuses on a comparison of recently collated historical data for 1970 to 2000 with scenarios presented in the Limits to Growth. The analysis shows that 30 years of historical data compares favourably with key features of a business as usual scenario called the standard run scenario, which results in collapse of the global system midway through the 21st century. The data does not compare well with other scenarios involving comprehensive use of technology or stabilising behaviour and policies. The results indicate the particular importance of understanding and controlling global pollution. So this is one particular cover of the book. This is what they call the standard run, and these are the outputs from their computer model of the world economy. And it's a bit hard to see. I've drawn over some of those lines to give you a little bit of a better idea. So what's interesting is that in terms of population, it appears to be tracking fairly well at the moment. Here's the population curve. It seems to have predicted the current population fairly well. Here we are in 2008. And in terms of resources, and this is a very, lumping all resources together into one thing, you can see that we appear to be halfway about in our depletion of those resources. But there are some other criticisms you can make of this. For example, here's the pollution curve. Now, of course, if we think of carbon dioxide as our main pollutant, the one that's giving us the most trouble at the moment, carbon dioxide, of course, persists in the atmosphere far longer than this particular graph might suggest. And also, as far as I can see, food per capita actually peaked back in 1984. So I'm not sure where this line comes from, because the author of the CSIRO study, Graham Turner, seemed to think that we were still tracking on this fairly well. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But anyway, it doesn't look pretty good. So this study did show that resources are about half depleted and that industrial output per capita will begin to decline about now. You may notice that here's 2008 and here's industrial output, and that makes us all think about the current economic crisis. But one thing I would criticise it for, it ignores Liebig's law of the minimum, in particular saying that it's the most critical resource that actually limits the population rather than a group of resources. And as I'll try to show you later, phosphate and oil are getting very limiting at the moment. CO2 is the main pollutant and persists in the atmosphere. Grain per capita actually peaked in 1984. And it also ignores the idea that population and food are not equally or evenly distributed, and that will have effects on what happens in different parts of the world. So when talking about oil energy, the main problem that we have as a society is that we simply don't comprehend the contribution that oil and energy in general makes to our lifestyle. We have what I would call the energy normality illusion. We are born into a very energy-rich society. We think that everything going on about us is normal, when in fact we're in a highly abnormal period of human history, and the lifestyles that we lead are bizarre in their wealth. So one way to look at it is how many invisible energy slaves are standing behind each one of us, providing us with the services that we use and that we expect every day. In other words, these aren't actual slaves, actual people. It's energy performing the same services. And behind each one of you, there are approximately 100 to 200 energy slaves which are providing you with your lifestyle, pushing your car, manufacturing your clothes, and everything else. Once energy starts to diminish, those energy slaves and that lifestyle start to evaporate. One other way that might give you an appreciation, this is just something from the last few days, there was the Earth Hour concert held a few days ago in Melbourne, and they did this thing where they tried to power it using bicycles. You can read about it at this website here. And here's a quote from a comment on that article. By pedaling 4 bicycles for an hour on Friday 27th March, my team of Greenfleet and friends generated 463 watt-hours of contributing towards the 50,000 watt-hours needed to power the Earth Hour concert held in Melbourne on Saturday 28th of March. Now, considering that a litre of petrol stores approximately 10 kilowatt-hours of energy, 1 hour spent pedaling 4 bicycles generates about as much energy as is stored in just 3 tablespoons of petrol. Looking at it another way, each bike was generating energy at the rate of about 1 small drip of oil per minute, which gives you some appreciation of the volume of energy, the amount of energy, and what in this very precious resource called oil. Okay, so we have a civilization which is based on hydrocarbon use. 60% of the world's primary energy driving our world economy is derived from oil and gas, and we're using this at a phenomenal rate of 1,000 barrels of oil per second. This is just something taken from Wikipedia. It shows you a breakdown of the world's energy sources. You can see that oil and gas together contribute, about 61%, and then another quarter of the world's energy is coming from coal. Hydroelectric, nuclear, and renewables are contributing about 13%. So 87% of our energy in our society comes from fossil fuels. In particular, 95% of our transport energy comes from oil. Now, and there really is no very good substitute for all of the things that oil does transport, especially for aviation and long-distance transport. And this globalized world is built on cheap transport. And that cheap transport is based on cheap oil. Also, very importantly, it's hard to see anything in this room which doesn't probably have a plastic component. Probably the clothes you're wearing, all of the organic molecules as well used just in the washing products you used this morning when you got up. Everything seems to contain plastics or organic molecules nowadays, and those are produced primarily from oil. This is what keeps me awake at night, because when it comes to civilization, the most important thing about civilization is the food source. You cannot actually have a civilization if you don't have farmers producing food that is surplus to their needs. You only get people aggregating cities and doing non-farming things when there is actually a surplus from the farming activities of the people doing that work. Now, it's difficult, maybe Barry has some better information on this, it's difficult to find an agreement on how much energy is actually used in food production. Here's one study which you can read. It's called Eating Fossil Fuels. It was published a fair few years ago, which collected information from a number of sources. And it basically said that a kilogram of oil is needed to produce every kilogram of food. And that with data from 1994 in the United States, you're using about 9.5 barrels or 1,500 litres of oil to feed each American every year. Now, that's as much energy as you'd use in a car in a normal year, and that's being used as well for each person to provide them with food. Now, this study, which, well, it's not really much of a study, it's collecting some information, and it's talking about what we have to do in the future to keep ourselves fed in the face of peak oil and climate change. It was just published this week by the Post-Carbon Institute. And it has data from a study published, I think, in 2000. And anyway, it breaks down the energy used in food, both production and supply, in getting it to your table and into your mouth. And it shows what they say from this particular study is that you're using about 7 times as much energy to grow and provide the food to you as is actually contained in the food itself. Now, that's a lot less than